My name is Ryan Maddox. I'm 36 now, and I spent most of my life trying to prove something to a man who never once looked at me like I was enough. My father, Charles Maddox, was a legend in the corporate world. The man who built a tech empire from scratch, who spoke at every business summit, who wore power like a second skin. And to the world, he was brilliant, inspirational, untouchable. But to me, he was just the man who taught me that silence could scream louder than any words. Growing up, I wasn't what he expected or wanted. I wasn't the athlete. That was my older brother, Adam. Varsity everything, with a jawline made for news anchors and the ego to match. My dad adored him. Adam could skip classes, crash the car, even get suspended once, and still dad would laugh it off, chalk it up to boys being boys. Me? I got straight A's. Built my first app at 12, rewired the house thermostat system at 13 to optimize energy use. My mom cried out of pride. My dad asked if I'd broken anything. He never hit me, never yelled, really. That would have been easier to process. He just looked through me like I wasn't there. I spent my teenage years like a ghost in my own house, overachieving in the background, hoping one day he'd notice. That maybe if I built something big enough, important enough, undeniable enough, he'd see me. But he didn't, not when I got into MIT with a scholarship, not when I interned at Google at 19, not even when I started my own company, Cortex Systems, and raised our first $2 million in seed funding before I turned 25. Every time I tried to tell him, he'd nod, vaguely interested, and then pivot the conversation back to Adam's new real estate deal or my sister Emily's wedding plans. By the time I was 30, I'd accepted it, or at least I told myself I had, until the night of his retirement party. He was stepping down after 40 years as CEO. The event was black tie held in a downtown Chicago ballroom with skyline views and wall-sized LED screens flashing his achievements in a constant loop. Everyone who was anyone was there. Governors, CEOs, former NFL stars. I stood near the bar in a tailored navy suit, alone in a sea of champagne and polite laughter. I hadn't even planned on coming. My assistant had RSVP'd on my behalf. The invitation had been more of an obligation than a welcome. Still, I'd flown in from San Francisco, landed that morning, and spent the afternoon debating whether I should actually show up. But something in me needed to see it through. Maybe I wanted closure. Maybe I just wanted to see his face when he realized I wasn't just the quiet one. I didn't bring anyone with me. No plus one. No press, no pitch deck. Just one small black box in my pocket, wrapped neatly in matte ribbon. That was the night everything changed. Let me back up for a second. The week before the party, I was in a board meeting with investors in Palo Alto when my phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen in over a year. Dad. No Charles. No last name. Just Dad. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail. Ryan, I know things have been distant, but I'd like you to be there. It would mean something. Maybe not to you, but to the rest of the family. There's a seat at my table. A seat at his table. Funny how a man can make inclusion sound like charity. Still, I went, because deep down, some part of me, some foolish, stubborn part, still thought maybe, just maybe, this would be the night he said, I'm proud of you. Spoiler, he didn't. But he gave me something else. He gave me my moment. And I made damn sure he'd never forget it. I arrived early, not because I was eager, but because being late would have given him an excuse to pretend I didn't show up. That's how he operated. Everything was optics, control, narrative. The ballroom was already buzzing. I recognized dozens of faces, some from magazines, others from years past, family friends, ex-employees, industry sharks. My mother saw me first. She crossed the room with the cautious warmth of someone who never knew how much love they were allowed to give. You look good, she said, smoothing down the lapel of my jacket like I was still 16. You too, Mom. Your father will be glad you came. I raised an eyebrow. Maybe not glad, she amended, but he'll notice. We both knew that was the best she could offer. When the lights dimmed and the MC took the stage, the room went silent. A highlight reel began to play, Dad shaking hands with politicians, cutting ribbons, pointing at graphs in wood-paneled boardrooms. The soundtrack was some epic orchestral swell, like he'd led armies into battle. Then came the speeches. First Adam, who spent 15 minutes talking about how Dad taught us all what it meant to be great. Then a former COO, then a celebrity entrepreneur who clearly owed his first million to a Maddox loan, and finally, the man himself. Charles Maddox took the stage to a standing ovation. He looked out over the crowd like a general surveying his kingdom, and then he said the words that would change everything. I built this company the same way I built my family, on values, discipline, excellence, and legacy. My stomach twisted. I see my son Adam here tonight, he said, voice proud, the embodiment of those values, a man of integrity, ambition, and results, and my daughter Emily, whose kindness and grace remind me that leadership isn't just power, it's presence. Polite applause. I waited. 1 second, two, five. Nothing. No mention of me, not even a glance. And then he added, almost as an afterthought, and of course, my younger son Ryan, the tech genius out on the West Coast doing digital things. Laughter. I froze. He hadn't even tried to make it sound respectful. It was dismissive, distant, publicly minimizing everything I'd ever done in front of 300 people. And that was it. That was the trigger. I reached into my pocket and wrapped my fingers around the small box. I stood slowly. I didn't wait for silence, didn't wait for a cue. I just walked, right past startled waiters, past my brother's smug grin, past my father's frozen expression toward the stage. People turned, phones came up, whispers rippled, and when I reached the front, I didn't climb the steps. I didn't need to stand on his platform. I stayed grounded. I held up the box. For you, I said simply. Calm, cold, like a surgeon before the cut. He looked confused, then smug, then slightly nervous. What is this? He said, voice low. A reminder, I replied. Since you're so good at forgetting, he reached for it. But before I let go, I leaned in and added, just loud enough for the front row to hear, from the son who never measured up. Then I walked away, the box still in his hand. The whole room was silent. And for the first time in my life, my father had no words. I didn't leave immediately. I went to the rooftop bar of the same hotel, ordered bourbon neat, sat under string lights above the city he ruled, and I waited. It didn't take long. 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed, first from Adam, then from my father, then from an unknown number. I ignored them all, because I knew exactly what was happening. I knew he had opened the box. Inside, there wasn't a trophy, not a resume, not even one of my many industry articles or photos from awards nights he'd never attended. It was a flash drive. On it, a simple video presentation titled What You Never Saw. A compilation, less than 5 minutes, no voiceover, just visuals. Clips from my company's launch, the standing ovation at my TED Talk, snippets of me walking the floor at a conference, surrounded by engineers asking questions, my name on a satellite patent, my face on the cover of Wired, a segment from CNBC, the young CEO revolutionizing AI risk management, even a short clip from a commencement speech I gave at MIT. All of it, backed by nothing but silence. No swelling music, no narration, just proof of who I was when no one was clapping for me. And at the very end, in white text on black screen, 5 simple words, you missed all of it. Then a pause and one final line, and I don't need you anymore. The next morning, I checked my email. 17 messages, 3 from Dad, one was blank, one said, we should talk, and the last just said, that was cruel. I laughed. Cruel? Cruel was erasing me from your speech. Cruel was ignoring decades of effort. Cruel was watching your son build an empire and calling it digital things. He'd used me as a punchline. I'd turned it into a full stop. And that week, the video went viral. Not from me. I didn't post it. Someone at the party had recorded the moment I handed him the box and stitched it together with the contents of the flash drive. God knows how they got it. Probably a leak from inside the PR team. It hit Twitter, then LinkedIn, then TikTok. Hashtags exploded, the Forgotten Son legacy denied, Ryan Maddox. I didn't comment, didn't repost, just watched it grow. Thousands of comments. Some called me heartless. Others called it poetic justice. But the ones that mattered most were from people who knew the feeling, the overlooked, the dismissed, the ones who had been treated like background noise in their own families. A week later, I got a letter, not an email, not a voicemail, a real handwritten letter from him. It was 2 pages long, neatly folded, clean cursive, perfect spelling. Of course, I won't quote the whole thing, but here's the part that stayed with me. I built a business by recognizing value. Yet I never saw the value standing in front of me. I called your world a phase. I called your work digital noise. But the truth is, I didn't understand you. And rather than admit that, I belittled you because I was afraid you didn't need me. And you proved it. I see that now. There was no, I'm proud of you, not even a clear, I'm sorry. But he ended with this: "You became something I didn't deserve to witness, but I hope one day you'll let me try." I folded the letter once and slid it into the drawer of my desk. I didn't throw it away, but I didn't answer either, because something inside me had shifted. I wasn't seeking his approval anymore. I had already become the man I needed. 2 weeks passed. I didn't call, didn't text, didn't respond to his letter, not out of bitterness, but because I realized silence wasn't revenge, it was freedom. There's a moment, if you've ever spent your whole life trying to earn someone's validation, when you finally understand it's not coming. Not because you don't deserve it, but because they were never capable of giving it. And once you stop needing it, God, the air gets lighter. Back at the office, I buried myself in work. My company, Arclight Systems, was finalizing a major partnership with the Department of Energy. Our new AI protocol had just prevented a major cyber attack on a West Coast power grid. Headlines were calling us the silent firewall of the nation. Funny. The man who called my dreams digital noise was now seeing his country depend on the very thing he once laughed off. I thought about that sometimes, but not with anger. Just distance, like looking at a photo of a stranger you used to know too well. A month after the retirement party, I was invited to speak at a university event. It wasn't a tech conference, it was a panel on resilience, sponsored by a mental health advocacy group for young men. The topic: fathers and sons, expectations, legacy, and the fight to be seen. At first, I hesitated. I wasn't sure I was ready to talk about that side of my life publicly. But then I remembered the whole point of reclaiming your story is that you get to decide how it ends. So I went. The room was packed, mostly college guys. Some looked like athletes, others like the quiet types who sit in the back of the class. All of them carried something behind the eyes, some weight, some silence. I stood on stage and said this: there's a pain that doesn't bruise, doesn't scar, but it lingers. It's the pain of never being enough for someone who was supposed to love you without conditions. I told them about growing up in my father's shadow, how every achievement felt like screaming into the wind, how I once thought success would finally make him see me, and how it didn't. Not really. But I also told them this: at some point you have to ask, are you building a life to prove someone wrong or to finally live right? After the event, a kid named Malik came up to me, tall, nervous, maybe 19. He said, "I haven't talked to my dad in 3 years. I keep thinking if I just accomplish more, he'll reach out, that maybe success will fix it." I looked him straight in the eyes and I said, "Maybe it will, maybe it won't, but don't live for that. Live for you." He nodded. So eyes wet. And then, "Thanks for seeing me." I shook his hand, but inside something cracked open, because for the first time, I realized I had become the man I needed when I was his age. A few days later, I got an unexpected call from my mother. We hadn't spoken in a while, not because of conflict, but because she never really chose sides. She floated, smiled, avoided. "Your father isn't well," she said. "What kind of not well?" I asked. "His heart. He had an episode. Mild, but they're running tests." I didn't say much, just sat there, not numb, not panicked, just still. "He asks about you," she added, "watches your interviews, even quoted your TED Talk once." I almost laughed. Of course he did. He missed the real show, so now he was catching the reruns. I didn't visit him in the hospital, I didn't send flowers, but I did send something else, an email. Short, to the point. "I hope you recover, not for me, for you. Because maybe now you'll finally see what legacy really means." He didn't reply, and that was fine, because it wasn't a conversation, it was closure. Months passed, and the strange thing was, I felt lighter every week. I traveled more, took weekends off, started mentoring kids from underfunded schools who wanted to get into tech. One of them, Luis, 14 years old, asked me during a tour of our headquarters, "Mr. Maddox, how did you know you'd be successful if your dad didn't believe in you?" I paused, then said, "I didn't, but I believed in who I could become. That was enough." He nodded, didn't say anything else, but as he walked away, I saw it. The thing I never had growing up: hope. The article that changed everything came out 6 months after the gala, Forbes magazine. Title: "The Son Who Refused to Disappear." It wasn't about tech. It wasn't about revenue. It was about resilience. About a boy who was told he'd never be enough and who stopped asking for permission to become more. My father didn't mention the article, but one morning, a new envelope showed up at my door. Inside, a photo. Me at age 9. wearing an oversized NASA hoodie, holding a cheap toy spaceship, smiling. On the back, in the same careful handwriting, "You always belonged in the stars. I just wasn't brave enough to follow you there." There was no signature, didn't need one. This time, the silence meant something else. Not absence, not dismissal, respect. The last time I saw my father was nearly a year after the gala. We didn't talk about the past, didn't rehash the night of the speech. We sat on the porch, 2 cups of black coffee, one quiet afternoon. And when I got up to leave, he said something that stayed with me. "I didn't think you were like me, but maybe you were always the best parts of me." I didn't reply. I didn't need to, because in that moment I knew this story, it wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about him. It was about me, reclaiming my name, my voice, my future, and finally becoming the man I always knew I could be.